These words on the Catholic understanding of merit come from Karl Rahner's essay, The Comfort of Time. May we understand them in the spirit of truth. Merit, in the theological sense of the word, means a property belonging to something given to us by God's grace, and not a despotic claim on God acquired by man of his own powers. Merit means that God, by his grace, a grace which redeems our freedom for the divine act of love, grants to us that what we do in time is intrinsically analogous to what is an eternal life, that is, a community with God in a true inner participation in the divine nature, which is really given to us, however much it always depends on God's free pleasure and on the immeasurable miracle of his mercy, which can never be administered or calculated by man. Merit means eternity in time, the arrival in us of God's grace and of eternal life. It means that man has really been given grace and is holy through God's great mercy, and this in the whole breadth and depth of his being, and hence also in his freedom, in what exists because it is done with responsibility. Certainly, this liberated act of freedom endowed with grace is God's gift. It is a gift because he gave us the possibility, because he elevated the possibilities of a spiritual person to the possibility of acts of eternal life. A gift he himself grants, so that through him we might really do in freedom what we can and should do, and both of these through him. Hence, merit does not praise us, but him. Hence, the dogma that man can gain supernatural merit if he is justified by God's grace and does in faith what God has commanded, does not glorify man before God and vis-a-vis God, but rather extols God, who not only deals with man as someone who passively receives, but who effects the greatest act of man in man. All meritorious actions are manifestations of the one divinely effected gift of grace given to man. They let appear what actually is in man. But by the appearance of what is thus, what thus appears becomes more and more. Man can increase in supernatural merit. This means nothing other than that man is more and more, ever more deeply, ever more existentially seized by God's life, and that this life claims him more and more in all the dimensions of his existence. This life becomes ever more deeply rooted in him. It integrates this possibility of his existence into a single, ever more complete and all-embracing act of man's whole belonging to God, which is affected by the Spirit. Man who thus acquires merit does not regard his own merits. He does not count them, for he is occupied with the very thing itself which is given in them, that is, with his neighbor whom he loves, with the task which he fulfills, with God for whom he longs. Since he is a creature, he testifies, even with his anxious solicitude about himself, to the fact that only one is God. For only this God does not need to worry about himself. The creature, moreover, honors him more when it works out its salvation in fear and trembling, when it thinks of itself, than when it acts as if it had already completely forgotten itself over God, as if it were no longer indebted for the point of departure from which it must proceed, since God and not merely the creature's self-seeking made it start there, that is, from itself. If someone acts properly, then he may think of his merit, but he must not forget that ultimately, which does not mean only, one must love God and therein necessarily forget oneself if one wants to gather merit. For the Christian will say with Saint Teresa of Lisieux, and hence this is not heretical but good Catholic thought, I do not want to gather merit for heaven. In the evening of this life I will appear before you with empty hands. For I do not ask you, O Lord, in any way to count my good works. Rather, I will clothe myself with your justice and receive from your love the eternal possession of yourself. For only if one prays like this does one gather merit, and ultimately in no other way. For ultimately one can gather merit only in that love. This is what we mean when we speak of the state of grace, in which one does not want to gather merit, but simply loves God himself and not oneself. It thus becomes obvious that merit is not merely, and not even primarily, a juridical concept, but that it tells us something about the life and the free person of man as it has become through his life. If there is permanent merit, then this means that the life of man does not dry up in the emptiness of the past. Man does not live his present merely in order to swallow up the possibilities of his future into something which has been. Merit is not merely a title of which God takes note. We ourselves are the book of life in what we have become. God's judgment is the unveiling of what we are, although it is indeed an unveiling which only God himself can undertake. If there is a Christian hope of eternal life, then this must include the fact that man lives differently in time than subhuman realities. The latter are driven through time. They become something new by losing just as much of the old as they gain of the new. Man, as a person before God, does not lose, but saves his future by taking it up into the past, which is the permanent outcome of the present. The older we become, the surer we are that we truly are. It is perfectly true that one thing cannot be taken away from us, and this is not only true in the paradise of remembrance, namely, what we were and hence are. It is becoming and not what has become which passes away. What perishes is not the secret extract of life, but the process of its preparation. When this process, which we normally call our life, has come to an end, then the perfect has arrived, and this is ourselves, as we have become in freedom. It belongs, of course, to the order of original sin in human existence that this collected extract of our life is not simply available to our reflection and self-enjoyment. We experience ourselves always as the poor from whom the past vanishes, who forget, whose personality, laboriously acquired in life, is cruelly torn down again by physical processes which have little respect for the dignity of the thus empirically constructed personality. But for the one who knows that spirit is more than the possibility of corporeally experiencing this spirit, this changes nothing about the fact that the history of the personal spirit is more and takes a different course than the history of the material. The person on this sinful earth achieves himself always and always more quickly into a state where he is no longer master of himself. But this means precisely that what cannot be master of itself, that is, the achieved life, has not been able to take flight into the unreal nothing, but retains final validity.